So why people will have very different perceptions of which one is real and which one is not real. But then we can go to this picture. I think then maybe you will have a kind of more apparent judgment, right? So looking at these two photos, I think this is more common nowadays. We use photos, we use cameras for makeups to make up we look much beautiful. And this, if you look at these two, then you may think, which one do you think is more real? Of course, most people will think photo one is more real. This is because we know the second photo is photoshopped, even if it's maybe by Photoshops or maybe by AI Photoshops. But so here we come to the question of why do you think people, this kind of two kind of filters, how do you think of them very differently? I think Huawei's engineers usually explains for their photos because their photo actually triggered a very controversial discussions online first. People feel that the moon photo is like so fake because they added too much details onto the moon. It's just like they are photoshopped. Then the Huawei engineers explained, they say, no, we are not photoshopping these moons. Because what do you mean by Photoshop? Photoshop means you put something fake onto the picture, just like this one, right? This photoshopped. You cut this photo a little bit to shape its face, and then you make the skin looks more smoother. But Huawei's engineer says that we are not doing all this kind of Photoshop to this moon. What they have done is just to help their camera to maybe turn down the light a little bit and turn to a kind of status then better capture the moon. So because in this way, why we capture the moon like this? Because it's in the sky, moon is the most is the shining spot, and it makes the other parts of the picture very dim, a little bit dim. That makes that the photo looks a little bit like a shiny spot in the sky. But if you turn down the light a little bit, and then you just adjust the devices a little bit, then you can get a better kind of photo. So it's just the AI automatically doing something to enhance the quality of the photo. And also they may recognize, oh, this is kind of moon, so they need to add some details onto it. But it's not, they say, but it's not a Photoshop, which means that if you put something, if you take the photo in different context or in different environment, the AI will do differently according to the environment. They will add the details to make it clearer and closer to the real moon in a different way. So it's not just a Photoshop to make everything look the same. It's just to enhance the photo in its environment. So here then we come to this kind of two very different terms of images. So one is called AI enhanced image, and the other is called AI modified image. I think AI enhanced image is very clear. It's just like use AI to help the camera and the device to better capture the object. And then it will automatically to make the photo closer to the real objects. So this is what we call AI enhanced image. So it's just enhancement. But AI modified image is very different. So we can see on this one, right? So we are all using this every day nowadays. If you take a photo, you don't Photoshop it, you don't add a filter onto it, then you will feel, it looks like that's the normal one, right? And also maybe today, but today I didn't turn on the makeup camera, so you are seeing an authentic me. But I think what do we mean by AI modified image? That means something that is automatically modified. It's photoshopped. So in this sense, we think that AI modified image is a kind of, if we use the common word fake, it's kind of fake image because it's not something real. It's just trying to change the reality a little bit to make it in another way that fits our social understandings or social perceptions of the so-called beauty. So this is what we say AI modified image. But AI enhanced image is another thing that they are not trying to modify the reality, but they are trying to reach the reality with the help of AI. So I think this then we will talk about later about how AI is actually changing the way we perceive the world and ourselves. So, but to begin with, I think AI enhanced image, we have another example. So here now nowadays we have many of these kind of photos, right? We call it like a 4K restoration or AI restoration, which means sometimes we have some old photos and they are damaged. Of course, this one is not damaged. It still looks quite good, but they're trying to make it like in a clearer way. So they're trying to restore it into a maybe a photo with high resolutions. So this is called AI resolution. But nowadays we also see some cases of how AI can help to restore some old damaged photos by trying to add algorithms onto the photos and trying to analyze the lights, the shape, and then put things on it. So this is kind of more sophisticated AI restoration, but this one I think is more about the resolution. But they will also add some details onto these parts where the lights, the original one, is not that clear. So I think this is another example of AI enhanced restoration. So this is quite different from what we usually say about the adding the filters or makeups onto the photos, because what they're trying to do, just like I think this is done by the engineers. What they're trying to do is to recognize these faces and add those details that were eliminated when the photos are taken. So they're trying to add back the details. So this is what we say AI enhanced images or AI restoration. But in this way, actually, AI is not only the first one that restore or kind of enhanced images. Even if before the era of AI, we are also using a lot of devices to help us make better pictures. So here we see, this is very often we see the digital cameras, right? So the digital cameras, they actually also have this ISP and DSP. So what are they? They are the image signal processor and the digital signal processors, which means they are trying to encode and decode the lights into the digital images. So because we know it's not like the celluloid picture. So if now any people still use this kind of celluloid cameras or to use this celluloid photo to take photos, if anyone have used this. But mostly we nowadays use digital photos. We don't use any celluloid. It's usually stored with the stick memory, right? And then the light comes in. So the ISP, the image signal processor, will capture light, and then they turn the lights into the digital signals. So in this process, actually, they are also trying to do some add-ups and delete something that when they are trying to transform the signal from the light signal to digital signals. So from the very beginning, we can see these digital cameras and the digital images are also adding something or deleting something from the lights when they are when they are making the photos. So this is why, if you have heard some people, some critics, they will say, they think the digital camera, the digital image is very different from our old perception of those celluloid photos. Why? Because those celluloid photos is, they believe, the real photo or films that they used to think about as photo images. But the digital images is not that one. It's just the digital pixels. We will talk about this later. So in this sense, they think when we are when we are using the digital photos, instead of those celluloid photos, we are actually making these films dead. So this is from the very kind of traditional kind of perceptions of seeing how we understand film. So in here, film, that means the celluloid film. So when they are thinking that when we are entering into the digital world, we are actually making the film dead. But of course, I think here we can see that different medium, the different materials, right? Even if it's like the same, we are taking photos. But if we are using different materials, we are using different devices, then we may have different understandings and perceptions of what is real and how we are trying to interact with the world through these devices. That means these devices, these technologies are actually shaping our way of perceptions as well as how we interact with the reality. So here today I would like to give you a very, very brief introduction or brief history of the visual technologies and its relationship with authenticity. Because I'm thinking why we think the Huawei moon sometimes looks so fake, or some people think it's real. The reason why people have different perceptions and understandings is because they have different attitudes towards technology, towards photo, towards camera, and towards reality. So first, I would like to say there is a very, very brief brief history of the visual technologies and its relationship with our reality. The very beginning is we start with painting, right? The old people, they start to paint in the caves just to show how people actually trying to paint all these animals to look like the real ones. And then we enter the Enlightenment era. Of course, I think it's very, very brief. It's jumping across the histories. Then we have developed a kind of technology in the Enlightenment and the Renaissance era. So in the Enlightenment, we developed this kind of technique, which we call it perspective. So what is perspective? So 透视, right, in Chinese, or the rule is very simple. So it means that everyone is seeing something from a perspective, from the point of view. And then you have to draw the picture from this point of view. So if you learn this kind of painting when you are young, so I think we all have to be taught of how to draw a picture, how to draw a kind of cubic. So we all learn this perspective. So it's the basic of what we call the Western Enlightenment oil painting. So from this kind of perspective, we started to draw something that looks more real. Because if we go back to this painting, right? This paint, if you think, it's not that real. I can see the shape, but we think it's not that authentic and real. But if we go to this picture, then we think, wow, this looks more like the real cubic. But if you think twice, then it's very interesting. If you see the cubic, we all know this, right? If you draw this line and draw this line, then the teacher will tell you, you have to draw the line in the front longer, slightly longer than the line behind this one. So that means the one in the front needs to be bigger, and the one in the back needs to be like shorter and smaller. So 近大远小. So this is the very, very, very kind of we call basic and simple rules of drawing. So this is how perspective are trying to tell us. But if we think twice, in reality, in the cubic is not like this, right? The cubic, the line is the same. They're of the same length. But when we are drawing, we are trying to make it different. So we think this one longer, this one shorter. So then it looks like a real one. So this is very interesting. So when we are trying to paint the world, trying to make it more real, we're actually distorting it. So in order to make it us feel real, we have to distort reality a little bit. to make it fit into our perception of real. So this is how the first very, very basic technologies we have developed to understand or to reach onto what is realism or what is authenticity. And then I think it's very interesting is then, of course, with this said, I think different cultures and at different times, people will have different understandings of realism and authenticity. For instance, on these two pictures, I think you may also have looked at this before, right? So this one is they are very famous paintings. They are painted by two. One is by Xi Baishi, the other is by Monet. So we can see that this is impressionist, right? The sunrise, sunset, sunrise, yeah. So they have very different impressions. They have different perceptions of what is realism and what is authenticity. For some people, they will think we need to mimicry every details of the reality. That's realism. But for someone, they will think, well, I just need to make an abstract or subjective realism. So they didn't draw very clearly about the details, but they just want to have a kind of impression of what the light looks like, what the feeling, what the moment feels like to be. So of course, there are always very different aesthetics and perceptions of realism and authenticity. But I think today I'm not going to talk about how this kind of aesthetic values, aesthetic styles and genres they developed, because I think it's more about philosophical understanding of beauty, of reality. So something we can talk about for years and maybe years and years. But today I would like to focus on those technologies. So it's more about how we use techniques such as drawing techniques or some devices to look into, to interact with reality and to make something that is real. So here is what we see. This is kind of more philosophical understanding of what is realism. But then we're going back to the visual technologies. I think then we have this kind of technologies, kind of peep show. I don't know if any of you have ever used this before. So peep show, that is like the small hole, and from the small hole you can see a lot of photos from this. So maybe many of us have seen this when we were childs. So this is kind of very ancient, very traditional kind of tools for toys for like kids to look into some photos and have a kind of immersive kind of experience. Because before the development, before the cinema, we have this kind of small kind of box, and through the box you can see all the pictures back there. So it's developed in the 19th century, and I think this technology developed also because of the development of the new continent. And then people are bringing different scenery, landscape photos back to their home countries. So people didn't go out, didn't go to other continents. They are beginning to use this kind of peep shows to see through the world. And then we have in the 19th century, we have this kind of movement. So this movement is more like if we now still, I think men still have this, right? So it's like a kind of device, then they will turn around and you can see the photos, they are moving. So like the horse is riding. So this is the kind of very simple techniques used before cameras when people are trying to better engage or better represent the reality. And then we come to, finally, we come to this very important devices that we call photography and cameras. So photography, I think we all know this. There are actually controversial debates about so which one, which country or who actually developed or invented photographs or photo cameras. Someone says, but I think the most common version we had is the Louis Lumiere, the French inventors. They have invented this, but some people say it's Edison. as like the one who invented the light. But anyway, there are different kind of versions, but usually we still say it's Lumiere, the French brother. They invented the camera and the movie camera. So at that time, they started to shoot all these kind of things of the reality. I think one of the revolutionary thing of the invention of photography is that they have actually revolutionized the people. So that means people with the camera, people no longer need to take the tedious work of copying all the details of reality. So you don't have to draw pictures, because drawing you have to take a very, very long time. But just with the camera, you just press the button and then you can get everything. So here in this case, I think what the camera actually brings to us is kind of quite revolutionary. We no longer have to paint what we want to record. We just use camera to capture reality. So in this sense, some people will say, especially some theorists, they will say, in this sense, cameras actually can enlighten us, and they can help us to create more about the realities rather than to mimicry or just to copy the reality. So some people will say, yes, we need to use cameras to create more photos, to create more kind of reality. And regarding this, I think there are two different theories or two different strands of theories about how we should use cameras or how we should use photos to approach reality. So one is Eisenstein. So he is a previous Soviet Union film critic, a filmmaker. He's very famous for proposing the idea of montage. Nowadays, I think montage is very, actually, most people knows this, right? Montage. We are using it everywhere. But first, I think it's like the Eisenstein who proposed this term just for the Soviet Union, those revolutionary films. So what his idea is about is that image itself doesn't make any meanings. They have to be put together to create meanings. So what montage is trying to do is they're trying to combine shots that are depictive, in meaning, neutral in context. But when they put them together, they become a kind of intellectual context and a kind of series. They can become into meanings. So just give you a very simple example. So if you put this man with this one, like a young lady is dying, then people will read these kind of sequences as sadness, right? So what he's trying to do is trying to say you need to put images into sequences to make meanings. I think it's the same with how we propose with like words. You have to put words into context to make meanings. So this is also the same, like you put a man with like a bowl of rice or a bowl of porridge, then a meal, then people think, oh, that means hunger. If you put this photo together with a young, beautiful lady, then they say, oh, this is lust. This is about a male gaze, something like this. So I think what this kind of montage is trying to say is we need to put the images into sequences and to create meaning. So for instance, the Soviet Union, they have this kind of film theorists. They are trying to create revolutionary images. So if you look, we also have this, right? In the old China, in the traditional way of, not old, but it's like in the revolutionary China, we also have these kind of images where we use films, we use images to cheer people up and to kind of do kind of persuasion. So this is kind of montage trying to use the using images to tell stories. But apart from this kind of revolutionary uses, we also use it for commercial purposes as well. If you see the MTV, I think most people may all know the MTV, right? We all watch all kinds of MTV. MTV is a very, very good example of montage, because usually MTV, we know they don't have storylines. They are usually like fragmented. They just put some shots together and then create some meanings. But actually the shots are taken from different places and at different times. But if you put these shots together, you create a new story. That's MTV story. That's the Hollywood film. It's also made based on this very simple technique of putting different shots together to create a sequences that generate meanings. But this is only the one strand of film theories. Another kind of people, they will have very different ideas. What they're trying to say is about the visual tech, the Bazin. So this is the French, what we call the French film critic Bazin. In Chinese is Bazin. And he says that the myth of total cinema, that means he thinks that photo or cameras should be used to actualize the reality. Although he thinks it's very difficult to actualize the reality, but you have to try to make the myth of total cinema. So what does it mean? He thinks that we should not always, like the Eisenstein, right? Put all the images together to create the new stories, because you are just cutting the realities into fragments and putting the fragments again to create new meanings. He rejected this kind of thing. He thinks that when we are taking photos, we need to hold the camera and to record the space and the time to record the reality. So what does that mean? So you don't have to cut them into pieces. You have to let people see the reality as it opens, as it happens, instead of you are making the judgment, you are making the editing of the reality. So this kind of theory is usually used in a what we call art cinema. So I don't know if any of you have seen this kind of art cinema, right? Maybe many of you. If you go to see commercial cinema and if you go to see art cinema, you will have very, very different feel. Because if you go to like a blockbuster, like more commercial-oriented films, they are usually very fast-paced. Everything is going quickly, and you can say, oh, you just feel like tense, intense when you are watching the film. But if you watch a art cinema, then you will feel it's very interesting because it's so slow, and the camera sometimes even don't move. They just put the camera. Sometimes they just put the camera there, and then the character will go in and go out and across the scene. So it's very interesting that how these kind of different ideas, they are trying to approach reality very differently. So this kind of technology in this kind of series, what the Bazin are trying to say is you don't have to cut the realities into fragments, but you have to use the long takes and to wait and to capture the reality instead of just using all the fragments, putting all the fragments together to create meanings. So this is what he calls to actualize reality. And also he thinks it's kind of myth because it's very difficult to realize, because you can't, it's very difficult for a director not to cut the film, right? You have to always do some editing. So in this way, you are trying to eliminate these kind of things to make the film look closer to this kind of reality. Then we come to this very interesting question of, so why people have this kind of myth about films, or why they have this kind of myth about what we call the myth of the total cinema. They are trying to say camera is used to capture the reality of the world. I think then we come to this kind of term, indexicality. So what is indexicality? That means actually it means index. Index means something that is a figure that can point into something, right? We also have that index. Index something that help you to monitor to find something in the kind of say like books. You can have index to help you to get a kind of a mapping tool to get into a destination. So it's trying to point something to point A to B. That means indexing A to B. That means indexicality is a phenomenon of a sign pointing to some object in the context in which it occurs. So what does it mean? It also can mean a kind of causality, but it's not about causality, but something like that. It's all relativity. So we can explain in this picture. So this is, for instance, this is the camera, right? So this is the camera lens, and then this is the subjects. So through the light sheds on the subject, and the light goes through the lenses, and then the picture is kind of transferred to what we call the film. So here, so this is a very basic physical class we would usually teach this, right? So in this case, we can see that the light sheds on this subject, this pencil, and then the light goes onto the film. And then they leave a kind of image on film. So if anyone still knows the film, if anyone used this before, this physical celluloid film, we will see that it's actually a kind of chemical material made of chemical things. And when we take photos, we know they have to put into a dark box. So they couldn't be exposed to sunlight. If once it is exposed to sunlight or light, then the image will leave onto the photo, will leave onto the image, will leave onto the film. So this is how the celluloid film actually works. It's actually leaving something, leaving the light, the shape of the light. They will be cast onto this celluloid film to give a kind of image onto this kind of film. So in this way, we can see when we are taking photos with celluloid film, actually something is happening, right? Something is happening. The film actually touches the lights at that moment. So it contacts this kind of environment. It contacts that kind of moment with the reality. So this we think, this is how the celluloid film actually captures or records the reality, because something really happens, just like the finger touches onto the film. But the digital light doesn't work in this way, as we will talk about this later. But in this celluloid film, we can see that the moment we take the photo, the light touches on the celluloid, and then they will make a kind of chemical reaction, and this specific moment then will left onto the celluloid. So this is how the camera, the photo camera actually works. But so here we people say that there is a kind of contiguity, that means causality, something like a causality and relativity. So when we are taking photos with these celluloid cameras, we are trying to think that, yes, something is happening here. I have a touch with the reality because the light leaves its shape on the film, on the celluloid film. But digital image actually totally works in a very, very different ways. So here is what we call the digital images, right? If we see the celluloid, then we will see that it looks like this. So on the film, you see the real picture. It's shaped by the light. But on digital images, actually what we see is this. So there is no whole picture. It's just pixels. It's just 1 and 0 digits. And the picture even may not be stored as a whole picture, right? So they transform everything into electronic signals and then store them in the pixels. In the storage card, these photos, these whole images may not be stored actually in a whole way, as a whole picture. Maybe they will scatter around somewhere over there and somewhere over there. So when people are trying to recall, so we are trying to read the digital photos, actually we just don't recall the photo. We just record the pixels. We just record the data. We are trying to find where are the data, where are the series, where are the data assemblaged. And then they put the data again, and then the data will transform into a kind of picture. So in this case, we can say that the digital image is totally different from the celluloid image, from its material being, right? It's very different. If you still see the celluloid, we can see the photos, we can see the images on the celluloid. But on the digital, we can't see anything. It's just something, just pixels. If you spread it around, then you don't understand what it means. It's just stored as a data assemblage. So in this case, someone have also proposed this kind of idea. So if we understand image, we will say this is image. But if we go to digital images, they say it's not actually an image. It's a data assemblage. So it's just a zero, they're just digits. They are just 0 and 1 digits about the data assemblage. And this is even the case in CGIs. So CGIs are computer-generated images. So if we know nowadays, in the past, if we want to generate something, we have to use the camera to capture the reality. So still, there are some connection between reality and the photo. But now we have this kind of technology called the computer-generated image, CGI. They don't use image, they don't use reality. What they do is just to generate pixels and create all these kind of figures with computer. So it even has nothing to do or no connection between reality and computer-made images. That means there is no kind of indexicality. So if to put it simple, I think indexicality can be understood as a kind of connectivity and causality, because when we are trying to think about photo is real, this kind of thing is real because there is a call of word, there is a word called usually saying going like this: seeing is believing, right? We still can seeing is believing, but now we all know that seeing is not believing, it's edited. But why we think seeing is believing is because we, especially for photos, if you took a photo, you in the past, we think, yes, it's real, because we can have a connection between the reality and the photo, the connection between that moment and the photo that you are taken. So this is the connection, the indexicality that makes us believe that photo is related to the reality. But now digital technologies have changed this kind of mechanism. So actually the digits does not represent the physical touch of the light. They are just a kind of simulated kind of signals. So it's very different. They can be manipulated very easily. And they're just the data assemblages. So here I think then comes to the question of how we understand the photos nowadays. I think there are just a very simple and not very simple, just a kind of very basic kind of, it's still developing, I think, some of my thoughts about the visual technology and how we understand visual technologies in the digital images. So I think the first is the nature of representation. We have to perceive what is representation has changed in the digital era. First, it is authenticity is constructed through visual technology. We have to see that because from the very beginning, we have the painting, right? So the painting is kind of the very original techniques we use to approach reality. And then we have this kind of camera and all these kind of other technologies to help us to record the reality. And now we have a CGI or even more like virtual VR or even AI to help us to create more kind of authentic images. So I think in this process, we see technologies play a very significant role of shaping how we can represent and how we interact with reality. But of course, I think this is another thing that we can't say is technology determinism, because we see that then that's the second thing is we as a human being also may have some putting some our own efforts into the creation of the images. And the other thing I think is very important is we see more and more human and non-human entanglements in the meaning-making practices in the digital era. So this is what we call human and non-human entanglement. That means when we are taking photos, it's not only about the camera is taking the photo, it's also our human being, right? We need to choose which angle, what light, what button, how we are going to adjust the devices to shoot the environment. And also we need the devices, of course. The device is very important, the technology. Then this is the digital technology is that non-human actor in the shaping of visual authenticity. And they also have very, very important role. For instance, for the digital camera, they have the DSP and ISP. They have this kind of signal processor parts, and then they will use this kind of parts to process the light. So they will generate their own kind of understanding of the light and then turn them into signals. So they're also shaping what the picture will look like. So these devices, these non-human automatically, they are trying to make photos as well. And also, I think another very interesting thing is we have to understand these kind of photos in a kind of datafied world. So how we understand images and the realities, because in the past, I think what we think about image is mainly about this old celluloid images, right? Like this one. So image is a whole picture. Everything is just like this. But nowadays, I think images is more like this. So we have to say everything is datafied. Everything is just a piece of digits. And then in this way, when we are going back to understand what is digital image, so we should not use these kind of older criteria as those celluloid to determine, to say, yes, this is real, and then this is not real. So then going back to the beginning question of whether do you think the AI enhanced moon is real, is more real or not real? Then I think why sometimes those kind of AI enhanced image makes people feel they are unreal. There are several reasons. So one reason I think it is because people feel that they are not like the normal ones they usually will take photos with, because they look so different. Just like we get used to the low resolution pictures. Then one day you give me a very high resolution picture, then I will feel shocked. I feel it's not the common way I will perceive the world. It's just like one day when you get used to, because maybe sometimes many people are like nearsighted. Sometimes if you don't change the glasses regularly, maybe you can't see things clearly. But one day if you put on a new glass, and you feel that everything becomes so clear. So it's just like this kind of feel that there is a kind of shock to people when their devices change the way they see the world. So I think one thing why we think the AI enhanced moon, the Huawei moon, is like the enhanced photograph is a little bit fake, is because we don't get used to it. We are still get used to the old resolution, old version of pictures, because we need time to adjust our expectations and our understandings as well as our habits. So this is one thing. And I think another thing very interesting is that why people argue that they think the Huawei, the AI enhanced moon is kind of photoshopped because it's automatically kind of changed, re-enhanced. It's automatically done by the AI. It's not by the human agent. It's by the AI. So people feel that they are deprived of the agency. So they think, well, it's fake. It's not real. So I think it's very interesting thing here is this is actually when we are talking about what is real and what is unreal, we are talking about how we think about representation and about nature. And actually, when we go deeper onto why we think this technology actually help us to get closer to the reality or not, then it also involves ethical questions. So when we are talking about the reality, when we are talking about authenticity and the realism, it's not always about technology side. So in the past half an hour or so, we have discussed a lot about technologies because technologies have helped us to get close to what we want to take. But the real question here is not only about technologies. Although technologies change the way, change the materiality of representation and the materiality of reality. But actually, what remains at the core is the ethical and the political question of who has the agency of determining the realism and of taking the photos. I think that can explain why some people will think the Huawei moon looks so fake because it's automatically enhanced by the AI without human consultation, without human input, without any kind of human adjustment. And then people will feel very uncomfortable with these kind of photos. And they will think, wow, this is something out of control, and this is something they would like to discuss. Should we all do photos like this, or we should do it like another way? So this is what I think actually remains a very interesting question in this kind of AI enhanced images. I think actually it not only can be applied to AI images, it can be applied to AI in a broader sense, because nowadays we're all talking about the datafication, about AI, about how they are shaping our world. But in reality, we know what actually remains at the core or at the stake is about human agency. So it's about how the process of datafication, about digitalization, about this kind of process. In this process, we sometimes feel like we are being pushed to move into a new era of digitalized world. But what we quest, but what we are worried about, what people are confused about, or what sometimes makes people anxious about is what about the human agency? So what are the human beings, how they are deprived or they are enabled by this process? So I think this is what actually from those critical data studies or from this kind of image, when we are talking authenticity, when we are talking about these digital images, these are kind of key underlining questions of technologies about and of kind of AI and of digital world. So this is what I am trying to talk about this AI and AI enhanced images, and also this kind of digital image. But with all this said, I think there is another very interesting kind of observations I have made about digital technologies. So this here is something I have talked about visual technologies and authenticities. They are shaped by together, both by human and non-human entanglement in the meaning process. But there is another very interesting thing I think we can also discuss about is that. So basically, the visual technologies and us are enabling us to do different kind of arts. So what does that mean? I think some of you may have already read this before, right? So this is the mechanical reproduction of arts. So this is the work of arts in the age of mechanical reproduction. It's a book written by Benjamin. So he wrote in his book, he said that the mechanical reproduction emancipated the work of art from its parasitical dependence on rituals. So what does it mean? So when they're talking about this, actually what does it mean is that they think mechanical reproduction and digital images have demystified art. Because in the past, if we use art, it can only be used in like by certain classes, by those kind of certain peoples, because we don't have too many copies. We only have one copy, right? So you have to refer to this copy to look at this. So it's not kind of a democratized way of sharing arts. But now we have this kind of mechanical reproduction. So what he is trying, because he wrote this essay very early, it's in the 1930s. So when he is talking about mechanical reproduction, it's mainly about printing machine, and also photography, and something like that. So in this case, when he is using this kind of mechanical reproduction, he's trying to say that this kind of mechanism are trying to democratize arts, because they can make a lot of copies. So printing machine, right? Now we can print the most famous paints for many times, for many copies, and then spread them across. So in this way, I think what he is trying to say is that there are people using this kind of technology to spread the arts to across the world, to democratize arts. This is a similar, I think this is similar utopian kind of understandings or utopian perceptions of mechanical and technologies, such as printing and then also internet. I think in a way, when internet was first invented, it was kind of within this kind of utopian kind of imagination of trying to democratize, to decentralize distribution of information. So I think in a similar way, we can also see that this kind of mechanical reproduction, they're also trying to bring this kind of democratization of arts and of images. Because when we are seeing a copy of a very famous paint, for instance, if we see this one, I think this one should be like extremely expensive if you want to buy a real one. But now we can also see this because of the digital technology, right? We can see it everywhere. We even can print it ourselves and then stick it on the wall. So this makes us have the capacity to get access to and also own these images. So this is a kind of democratization process. And then this image no longer represents the has a kind of aura, also kind of religious kind of mysteriousness, because it can be duplicated. Then I think with this kind of reproduction of the digital images, and this is more even the case in the digital era, because nowadays we have even more and more kinds of possibilities to reproduce different kind of artworks, images, and the copy paste is so easy and so convenient. And then we come to this very interesting, and finally we would say it's the metaverse. So metaverse is a very, very popular kind of term or idea nowadays, right? If anyone have still, I think many people have heard about this, things like one or two, maybe last year or the year before. Then since the Facebook turned their name into Meta, and then it becomes a very hot term and everyone is using it. And just a few days before, I think some schools, some universities are even founding or establishing a kind of metaverse, school of metaverse, something like that. So it's very popular nowadays. I think it's very interesting thing, but we can think about it in a very different way. Why people are dreaming or fancy about this metaverse? Of course, I think on the one thing it is because it's really very interesting because it represents the trend of the future, where every people will move from this kind of physical world to a virtual world. In that virtual world, you can do everything, right? And then we also can see that why industries and they are also very interested in inventing in the metaverse. I think why metaverse is so popular is because it provides another way, another territorial for capital accumulation and development. Because nowadays we all have we have to develop our economies, and our economies have to economic growth relies on consumption. And now we have a lot of loads of entertainment, social media entertainment, social media platforms, and short videos, TikToks, and all these kind of things. They have occupied most of our time. Then we are still looking for growth, right? So where to find that? It's metaverse. It's something, a new territorial, a new dreamland where we can start again the capital accumulation process in this kind of physical, non-physical, the virtual world. So I think this is why people are trying to invest in the metaverse, because they represent a new territorial of future investment for economic growth, and we can move everything there. But going back to our talk today, so we are talking about authenticity. If we go back to the metaverse, I think it's very interesting because everything in the metaverse is not authentic. It's just a digits. It's just the digital images, created images. And there is no indexicality, no connected to the reality. They don't have to be connected. They're just created. And sometimes they are just trying to create a parallelly different universe from our real or existing physical universe. So I think this is actually the kind of more advanced or developed version of what we call digital image or data assemblages. So in the metaverse, it's still, just as we said, digital images are data assemblages. So here is like the metaverse itself is also a data assemblage. It's just digits. Now you don't have to rely on other things. But so this is kind of extreme example of how indexicality, connectivity to the real world actually falls down. Just like the reproduction of the mechanical reproduction have democratized the arts or the world, we can see metaverse actually can demystify the physical world. So we no longer need the physical world. Maybe one day we just can live on the metaverse. Of course we can. So there is a kind of a film, if many of you have watched this before, there is very old film. It's made in the 2000s, I think, which is called it's like the simulacra. So and in this kind of films, then we also see a kind of virtual world where people just virtually live in this kind of meta universe. And then this kind of paradox comes. I think it's very interesting. So when there is kind of fall down of this kind of indexicality and the physical world, then people also urge for another kind of aura of indexicality to justify their digital beings. Because as we know, in the digital world, everything can be duplicated, everything can be like copy pasted. So there is nothing we call kind of the real authentic one, because digital images can be copied very easily, right? It's just a copy and paste. It's just a 1 click or 2 clicks. Then people are trying to think that in this way, we still need something authentic. We still need indexicality, something just to, so, you know, people are always like this. First of all, they celebrate a kind of revolutionary things. Like when the digital image comes, they think, well, it's so good because it's revolutionized the way we perceive the world. It democratizes us because everyone can take photos. Because in the past, no one can take photos, right? Only those only those photographers. But now everyone can take photos, and everyone can use photos. Everyone can copy photos. It's so easy. But then after this, they will miss something old. So this is also very interesting. We see those called like vantage. There is a kind of vantage. They're also missing this kind of nostalgic way of seeing things, nostalgic ways of having things. Then some people, if you know, they have this kind of vintage kind of stores, and also those nostalgic kind of favored kind of shops or music or photos or those films. Some people are still using celluloid film, and some people, if you know, they use the disc or this kind of viral kind of disc to listen to the music. So they still sometimes may miss the physical copy, the physical material of images, of sounds. Because now we are in a kind of digital world, we can't capture everything. If you see a picture, you can't capture it, you can't hold it. Only when you are like print it, of course, we hold it. But most of the time, when we see a photo, it's usually on the phone, right? So you can't hold it. It's just intangible. You can't touch it. You can't feel it. It makes people a little bit like worried, anxious. Then again, they think we need to find something like the old tradition. So they want something back into the physical world. So they want something just like the thing can demonstrate this is a photo that cannot be duplicated. This is my photo. This is the real photo I've taken, or this is the real photo I have designed. So then comes what we call this kind of all kind of things like blockchain technology, those NFT, non-fungible tokens. To some extent, I think this technology, the blockchain technology, represents another kind of trend of remystify. So they are trying to remystify this kind of images, digital images, to make them unique, authentic, and to reclaim this kind of authenticity in this kind of digital world. So I think this is some kind of observations about I think the metaverse, about this kind of the trend of digital images. From the very beginning, we have talked about the Huawei Moon, the Moon, why it is like yes, this one, why they are very different, why people have different perceptions. I think it's just mainly because they have different people have different perceptions towards images, and these kind of perceptions are actually shaped by technologies and by the way we have interacted with the reality throughout our history. And now we can go back to the metaverse, to this kind of digital world. We have seen that the kind of material base of photo or the material base of images have changed. They have changed from, in the past, the celluloid, the physical copies, to this kind of data assemblage in this datafied society. So when we are talking about reality, when we are talking about authenticity, and when we are talking about indexicality in this datafied world, we're actually discussing under a different logics. But I think still something because remains important, I think, is the ethical and the political underlying questions of how we perceive reality and who should take the agency in creating meanings. So because we think reality or take photos is a way of creating meanings, why people sometimes we think AI can help us, can enhance the photo, and they can generate more kind of possibilities because they really expand our abilities to make meanings. But still, I think we have to think about in this process who or how we can still have the agency in taking this kind of what we call the kind of agency in determining what should be done or what should be taken as a real in the real world. So this is something I think I'm trying to say about these visual technologies and authenticities, and about some belief, my understandings of like the nature of representations, and also the ethical questions underlining these kind of controversial themes about what is real and what is authentic regarding digital images.